Over the past 2 weeks, the St. Paul public school system has been rocked by damning allegations of rampant sexual abuse and the enablement of rape culture. What's worse is that these sexual abuses were not only enabled by the accused friends and family, but also by the very education system that was meant to transition both of them into adulthood. In the couple of days following Carla's shocking announcement, the internet soon reverberated with the echoes of hundreds of other victims of sexual assault speaking up with their own stories. Soon enough, there was a list published online. The contents of this list were former students at Central and other SPPS high schools who were potential predators. It was meant to be a resource for women around the Twin Cities to avoid these people. However, by the end of the weekend, the list was gone. With so many stories of sexual abuses and systemic neglect that they come with, the neighborhood reporter decided to sit down with the woman who started this movement and talk about both why she came forward with the allegations now and what she sees in the future of the Twin Cities education.
Okay, I'm Carla. I'm the person that started the Instagram page, and that kind of helped me connect with Cynthia.
Hi, I'm Cynthia. I'm an activist in the Twin Cities.
And I'm Jordan, and I'm a sexual health educator in the Twin Cities.
Carla, your story shows so many institutions failing to address what they should be set up to address. When did you first get the feeling that these institutions would not be enough to answer the questions and the problems that you were feeling?
Yeah, I would say it first happened, when I filed my first police report, they really had motivated me. At the hospital, even at the precinct, that justice would be served. And it wasn't until I connected with attorneys and lawyers that they kind of told me I didn't have a case, where I really felt just that there was nothing else that I could do. I felt kind of lost. Yeah. Perfect.
So pretty early on, you would say that happened.
Yeah, I would say at first I had been really encouraged by all of my police encounters, file a report, something will come of this. And then I finally do it, and then nothing ever came of it. And so that just kind of let me down. And seeing, I waited maybe 3 months, I tried again, and yeah, there was just no justice.
Sure. Rape culture is a term that's being used by a lot to describe the environment at Central and greater SPPS during this whole time these abuses have occurred. Is that something that you think SPPS enabled, and how so?
I do think so. I think that rape culture was kind of glamorized there, and just like the whole party scene has been really taken over by that school and enabled through principals and family and even just, their peers. I think Cynthia has some.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend that I went to college with about kind of her experiences, and just talking about how it was the smaller things that kind of built up to larger things. People just excusing behavior, people talking about specific parties that were happening that were hosted by particular organizations at Central High School, and how it was just known that those were those spaces that people just got really wild and would drink, and that it was allowed. So I'm what I ask is, I didn't go to Central, but I did live in St. Paul for some time. Who knew of this? Because it's not something that has happened just in the recent years. It's something that has been happening for a while. So people know, and I'm pretty sure that people have come out. And why has it taken for people to take their own justice into their own hands, for people to even want to start taking accountability?
And I have something to add to that. I know one particular story. I had always thought, there's no way that, just the response I've gotten on Instagram, that the school didn't know. I know that they did know, just because I spoke to a survivor, and I'm just with all this impact, there's no way that someone, an adult or someone in that position of leadership, didn't know. And they said that they spoke to the principal, and they said the last time we had an accusation like this, it almost tore the school apart. And so that's kind of where I'm seeking accountability.
How did you feel when you initially shared your story of abuse, and how do you feel now after all these other women have come forward with their own stories of abuse? How does that make you feel personally, that this is an experience that so many people have shared with you?
Yeah, at first I posted it not expecting to be believed. I didn't even know really what to expect. I had contacted family members, friends of my abuser, and it was just kind of I want you to see me, this is what it is. And then just survivor stories of, experiences, I would say more traumatizing than mine, have just kept me motivated to seek justice for not only myself, but for them.
When you say you didn't think you were going to be believed, why did you think that? What made you think you wouldn't be believed?
Because I had been silenced so long just by our system, and even just people the community, around him. And now I see why I was silenced by that community, because it's full of enablers and also assailants. So now it makes sense, but it's great to see that there is a community that's stronger than that.
I saw a list online of, so many names of people who are potential abusers. Why is it important to have a list like that? Why is it important to make a list public like that? And what do you say to critics who say that something like this is only going to hurt the future of all these people who have been accused?
For me, one of the functions of a list like that is community safety, first and foremost. If there are people that are potential abusers, it's important for others to know who those people are, so that they can be wary of that. That's the first thing that came to mind for me.
And I think another thing that Carla and Jordan and I talked about is when you go to your family, when you go to your friends, when you go to your friends' friends or people who know, like, you expect them to believe you. You expect them to, like, be on your side. And when they aren't, and you have been asking for accountability, the only thing left then is to actually ask for accountability in other ways. And so a list like this is saying, like, we have already done all that we could and you did not listen. And so now we have to do this because the justice system is not listening to us. Our friends and family aren't believing us. So we have to take accountability in a different way. And it's a part of community safety.
I think it's important to note that a lot of the institutions that people think are set up to prevent sexual assault and to respond to it when it happens haven't done their jobs, right? So we know that institutions like schools and the police don't usually prevent sexual assault. And when it happens, they don't do a great job of responding to it or helping the victim or survivor seek justice. And we also know that some of those institutions, like the police, are complicit. The fact that in the Hennepin County Police Office, there were a whole bunch of untested rape kits that were found that had been, quote unquote, lost. And those are the lives and the cases of victim survivors, right, that were not followed up on with care. And we also know that institutions like the police sometimes perpetrate further violence, whether that's sexual violence or other types of violence. So when it comes to thinking about why someone would feel like they wouldn't be believed, those are just some of the reasons why, in addition to the fact that in the media, the way sexual violence is reported on frequently blames the victim as kind of a first narrative that's presented, is one that is victim blaming. There are a lot of reasons why someone would feel hesitant to come forward about sexual harm that they had experienced, and why they would fear that they wouldn't be believed.
So that leads me pretty much directly into my next question, and that was this movement of Central 2 and U2. It's quickly embraced the idea of consent education in schools K through 12. Why is that so important in this movement, and what impact do you want to see that happening? Yeah,
consent education, and I would add not just consent education specifically, but actually comprehensive, inclusive sex education is really, really important because in Minnesota right now, Minnesota is one of 37 states where the sex education is not required to be medically accurate, which sounds really surprising. And what that leads to is a situation where schools and school districts get to choose their own sex ed. They get to set their own requirements for it. And the requirements are very, very minimal in terms of information that they have to include. And what that leads to is people having sex ed that is, at the very best, positive and empowering, and at worst, actively damaging and shaming. And we know that emotions like shame don't help people make good decisions. They don't help people take care of themselves or have healthy relationships. There are so many stories that I've heard throughout my time as a sex educator, and even before, of people who did exercises in sex ed class in high school where they had to take a paper heart and tear it up into little pieces. And the teacher would make the analogy that that is the heart that you're giving to someone if you have sex with someone before becoming married to them. And it's surprising how many times I've heard similar stories like that. Consent education has to teach people fundamental principles about consent, such as it's never okay to touch someone's body without their consent or to make them touch you. Everyone has a right to say who touches their body and how. Just some basic principles like that can be taught at any grade level. And then functional knowledge too, skills on how to recognize what consent is, possible signs of non-consent, what sexual assault and what sexual violence is and includes, what rape culture is, and what things and attitudes contribute to normalizing rape culture. These are all things that consent education can do. and change the attitudes and norms in society that enable and promote sexual violence.
Yeah, makes sense. Do you two have anything you want to add? Carla, do you want to add anything? What it means to you? Why you think it's important?
I think it's really important, and I think it doesn't just end at the schools. I think this is bigger than just the Twin Cities. I think, we need to speak to legislators and try to get something passed. I think it was, like 2019, 2018, I know they had tried, and it passed either the House. Yeah, it passed in the House, but not in the Senate, and it's like, let's try again and do something, because obviously there is a problem here, and whatever system they have is currently not working.
So one of my final questions, I guess, is what do you want to see come from this movement? And I'm sorry, my bad. And what kind of response are you hoping for from A, people who are on the list of people who have been sexual predators, and B, people who aren't on the list but may have enabled that behavior? What do you want them to feel? What do you want them to say? What kind of response are you looking for from them?
Yeah, just kind of touching on guilt and shame. I'm not doing it to shame anybody. I don't want anybody to be isolated. I know Cynthia can touch more on this, but I want accountability. I want, yes, I did it. This is how I'm going to do better. Reflect on yourself, go to therapy. I mean, whatever it takes. But right now, what I have seen, which is really unfortunate, and I mean, like even Jordan said, the police will shame you, and that's kind of how, or not believe you. And I've gotten a lot of those, like, these are lies, these aren't true. But I'm like, this is my story, and like, you can't tell me that I'm lying when I'm like, I laid out all my proof. I mean, I was told not to, I was advised not to, and I'm saying, like, so many people have come up and supported me, and it's been just really nice to see, and I just kind of want to use what I've made to kind of support others.
Yeah, on our call earlier, we were talking about the difference between guilt and shame, because a lot of people who are criticizing, like survivors coming out and reporting and saying who has committed this abuse, have said, like, stop shaming people. But the reality is like, shame is an internal feeling. Like, the difference between guilt and shame is guilt is a temporary emotion, right? If I eat, my little brother's chocolate bar and he had asked me not to, like, I should feel guilty, and that should motivate me to want to say, like, I'm so sorry that I did that. Shame, on the other hand, is more so about a core belief that someone has that they're bad and that they are unworthy. And the reality is like, with all these allegations coming out, there's a lot of people who have done like good things or like are considered good people, but the reality is rape culture is so pervasive that anyone could have like been a part of it, right? And if you deep down really believe that you are a bad person, you get stuck in that, and you want to defend yourself from not feeling those bad feelings.
So you don't want these people to feel bad necessarily. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is, like, if you are stuck in shame and are ashamed of like who you are and what you've done, like, you're not going to be motivated to want to change your behavior. You should feel guilty. You assaulted someone. You raped someone. You made someone's life a personal living hell with the actions that you took. However, the bigger thing about this is we don't want punitive justice. We've already seen how police systems don't work. Like, all of the people who are coming out, the reason that people are taking their justice in their own hands is directly tied to the uprisings that are happening in Minneapolis and across our nation. We're saying we're tired of the justice system failing us. Clearly, like, we need to take this into our own hands. We are a community like ourselves, and so how can we actually build that? How can we do that? And people do better when they are in community. And like what Carla was saying too, she already went out to like people's friends, their families, and was not believed. Those people are also complicit in this rape culture. And so they have a responsibility to the people in their lives to call them out and say, like, hey, what you did was wrong. Like, let's heal from this, because we're trying to heal generational trauma when we are like moving forward to heal from this like issue that we're experiencing right now, if that makes sense. Yeah.
One thing I want to add to that is that any victim or survivor of sexual violence has a right to do exactly what folks have been doing, to put names out there if they want to. That's absolutely within someone's right to make that choice about their experience. And so if there are consequences of people feeling guilt or shame, I think it's productive to talk about that. And I also just want to affirm that victim survivors of sexual violence have a right to do exactly what folks have been doing right now with naming people who have perpetrated harm against them.
Yeah, and with that, I just want to say that it is not, I mean, it is on the abuser to reflect and try to change and do better, but the survivors don't owe them, any forgiveness. They've been silenced for so long. And I mean, if they feel shame and guilt, imagine how they felt after experiencing that trauma that they've lived with for years. I've had people that have said, it was 1997 and this happened. And I just want to thank you. And it's like, wow, you've been holding this. So yeah, I don't feel bad that, people feel guilty or ashamed, but reflect on that and do better and take accountability.
Why do you think that increasing funding for sexual education and consent classes in K through 12, why is that so important now, and what impact do you want to see that have directly?
Increasing funding for sex education is so important because there are a lot of teachers who are put in a position where they have to teach sex ed and either don't want to, are not comfortable doing it, have their own personal experiences or trauma related to sexuality, or they just don't have the knowledge or the skills to teach sex ed in a way that is inclusive and empowering instead of shaming and really sex negative. And so what funding will do is to help schools put educators or put teachers who are excited, interested in the topic, and committed to doing it in an inclusive way in those positions, instead of just finding a teacher who's probably already very overworked teaching other subjects, maybe like PE or health or something like that, and ask them to teach something that they're not equipped to do or not comfortable doing. And funding would also help schools that are not just high schools have more and better comprehensive sex ed. The conversations about consent and sexuality in general can start when people are really, really young. And so funding could do things like make sure kindergarten classes or third grade classes have education about puberty, about healthy relationships, about some basic boundary stuff, of course, in an age-appropriate way that can really pave the way later on for resetting those peer norms that enable violence.
Yeah, and with when we talk about funding, that also means that other places need to be defunded. And so this is also where this is related to Black Lives Matter. Reallocating resources that have been originally given to police, like clearly they did not have it within their budget to test those rape kits. I don't know how, I don't know why, when they have budgets as big as they do. And so reallocating to sex educators into sex ed curriculum means that there can be more creativity and innovation instead of like having them live in this sort of scarcity of like, we don't have enough money to actually have good curriculum. We don't have enough money to like really dive deeper into like what's happening. Yeah.
What role can society play in curbing some of these assaults and abuses that may not always be obvious, that may be happening in the shadows or in closets and places like that? What role can society play in curbing those things from happening?
The way that I like to think about and kind of conceptualize rape culture is in a pyramid shape. And you can do a quick Google search for rape culture pyramid or sexual violence pyramid to get an idea of what I'm speaking about. But the general idea is that there are things at a base level, the base of the pyramid, that excuse violence that happens and that enable violence that happens. And some of those things that are at the base of the pyramid are things like jokes about rape, sexist attitudes, attitudes and beliefs about people's fundamental worth, like racism, sexism, classism, ableism, right? All of those ideas have to do with thinking that certain people are inherently different or worth less than other people. And those kinds of attitudes down the line create a culture that enables violence again. And so as far as what members of society can do to interrupt sexual violence at like a really kind of base level, it starts with intervening and dismantling those kinds of attitudes and beliefs when people see them, instead of just having those things be normalized.
What role you want to see other people play in curbing these kind of things?
I think as a society, I just think more of like community. It seems like I have some stories that have been shared of like women being passed out on the street in front of some of these like abusers' house. And like, there's no way the community didn't see that. There's no way that people didn't know. So I would just like to see the community also come together to do better. Like I don't know if that looks like a crime watch or like a neighborhood watch or just like holding each other accountable and just stopping that violent behavior.
Is there anything else you folks want to add? Perfect. Is there anything else you folks want to add?
One thing I want to add is that what people in society can do to interrupt cycles of violence or sexual violence in this case, one thing is to know and practice consent, right? To develop an understanding of what consent really is, what things are included under that umbrella of sexual violence, and to know and practice that. And that can start as early as when a child is learning about body boundaries, right? Like if a kid doesn't want to give a certain family member a hug or a kiss, that's an opportunity for parents or family members or whoever is there to start talking about consent and actually practicing that.
Thank you all so much. It seems as though there's a potential solution in consent education classes from K through 12. What remains to be seen is where this funding will come from and what those classes will look like. For more information on this case and on stories around the Twin Cities, stay tuned to the Neighborhood Reporter.